Hello and welcome to grammar class. Today's lesson is stative passive and dynamic passive. As you know, a passive voice verb indicates that the subject is not the doer but the receiver of the action. In other words, if a verb is in the passive voice, it indicates that an action is done to the subject and not by the subject. We also know that in passive voice, the main verb comes in the past participle or third form after the auxiliary verb be. For example, in the sentence, the mirror was broken by the maid, the verb was broken is in the passive voice. See here, in the passive voice construction, was is the past form of the helping verb be and broken is the past participle of the main verb break. And the passive verb was broken indicates that the subject mirror is not the doer of the action but receives the action of breaking. In the next example, the verb is hunted is also in the passive voice. Is the present form of the helping verb be and hunted is the past participle of the main verb hunt. This passive verb also shows that the subject of the sentence, the deer, is not doing the action but receiving the effect of the action of hunting. But you see, in English grammar, there are two functional types of the passive voice. Number one, the dynamic or actional passive, which denotes action. And number two, the stative or adjectival passive, which denotes a state or condition. In other words, if the passive voice construction denotes an action, it's called a dynamic passive. On the other hand, if it denotes a state or condition, it's called a stative or adjectival passive. For example, in the sentence, the mall was closed so I couldn't shop, the passive construction was closed indicates the state or condition of the mall. So in this sentence, it's a stative passive because it does not show any action. But if you look at the sentence, I don't know when the mall was closed, you will understand that the passive construction was closed shows an action, the action of closing the mall. So here it's a dynamic passive. Similarly, in the sentence, the flower vase is broken, the passive construction is broken indicates the condition or state of the flower vase. So it's an example of stative passive. However, in the subsequent clause, how was it broken? The passive construction was broken indicates an action, the act of breaking the vase. And so it's a dynamic passive construction. So the same passive construction may be either stative passive or dynamic passive depending on whether it shows a state or an action. Now let's try to understand the dynamic passive and the stative passive more clearly. The dynamic passive is also known as actional or eventive passive. It shows that an action or activity is done to the subject of the sentence and the doer or the agent of the action is mentioned in the by phrase. Now see some examples of dynamic passive on your screen. In the first example, the passive construction was locked denotes an action, the act of locking the gate. So it's an actional or dynamic passive. And the doer or agent of the action, me, is mentioned in the by phrase at the end of the sentence. In the second example, the passive construction was finished also denotes an action, the act of finishing the project. Hence, it's also dynamic passive. In the last example also, we notice that the passive construction was scared denotes the mental action of scaring the child. And here, the agent or doer of the action is the spooky story mentioned in the by phrase. So in short, the dynamic passive construction is one that denotes a physical or mental action and the doer or agent of the action is mentioned in the by phrase. But what about the stative passive? Well, the stative passive indicates the state or condition, the physical or mental state or condition of the subject, and that no action is done to it by a doer or agent. Obviously, a stative passive construction is not followed by the by phrase in the sentence. Now here are some examples of stative passive on your screen. In the sentence, the gate was locked, the passive construction was locked shows the state or condition of the gate. So it's an example of stative passive here. In the next example, the project is finished now. The passive construction is finished shows the status or condition of the project. Hence, is finished is a stative passive construction in this sentence. Then in the sentence, the child is very scared now. The passive construction is scared indicates the emotional state or condition of the child. Needless to say, is scared is a stative passive construction in this sentence. We understand that none of these passive constructions shows any action or activity, so the doer or agent is not mentioned in the by phrase in any of these sentences. So the stative passive construction is made up of the helping verb be, like am, is, are, was, were, be, been, etc., and the past participle of the main verb. And the stative passive gets its name from the word state or condition because it describes the state or condition, the physical or emotional state or condition of a person, place or thing. Hence it does the work of a participial adjective and is also called adjectival passive. But remember, the stative passive doesn't show any action or activity unlike the dynamic passive. As a result, a stative passive construction is not followed by the by phrase mentioning the doer or agent of the action. It's simple. No action indicated means no doer or agent of the action. But the stative passive is followed by a preposition or a prepositional phrase in the sentence. Now see some model examples of the stative passive construction on your screen. In the first example, the stative passive construction was disappointed followed by the prepositional phrase with his marks indicates the emotional state of a person. In the second example, the passive construction am bored followed by the prepositional phrase with this film indicates my emotional condition. It does not show any action, so it's a stative passive construction. In the sentence, people were amazed at his performance, the passive construction were amazed indicates the mood or mental state of the people, so it's a stative passive example. In the next example, the passive construction is located points out the location or a permanent situation or condition of our school and no action, so it's an example of stative passive as well. In the next sentence, the school is closed, the passive construction is closed is an example of stative passive because it indicates the state or condition of the school and no action done to it. In the sentence, the player is injured today, the passive construction is injured describes the physical condition of the player and no action, so it's an example of the stative passive voice. In the last example also, the passive construction was known indicates a long-term status of Mother Teresa. So this too is an example of the stative passive voice. So that's the end of today's class. I hope you liked the video. Please be sure to like, comment, share and subscribe to my channel for more grammar videos. Thank you so much.